It's been a few weeks, maybe even a month, since Until Then released, and I think it's about time we talk about some spoiler content. So yes, if you're planning on experiencing it yourself, maybe you should click away to our spoiler-free review of it, linked right here, in this corner over there. Until Then brought us a heart-wrenching, bittersweet story that honestly reminded me of Makoto Shinkai's older works, namely 5 cm per second, but with the magic or supernatural elements of his latter works like Your Name. But Until Then does something that's uniquely theirs. The way it wonderfully portrays grief, specifically how it uses recurring timelines to tell Mark and Nicole's story, and how their experience is actually very much rooted in real-life experiences of grief. But first, let's cover all our bases and go through a rough summary of the plot. Again, this is a spoiler-filled video. This is your last warning. Also, skip to here if you think that the plot is still fairly fresh in your mind. Alright, you ready? Mark Borja is a student who lives in a post-ruling world. The ruling is a catastrophic earthquake that happened a few years prior to the events of the game. His normal high school life was suddenly disrupted when he ran into Nicole Laksamana, a girl whom he felt he's known for a long time. After an altercation with her, they were sent to the principal's office and were forced to work together on a project. After that, they get close to each other and bond over the piano. However, they share something darker than just a love for the piano. Mark lost his mother when her plane went missing as she was on the way home from working abroad. Nicole lost her best friend, Jake, when he and his mother went missing trying to move away from their violent father. In the background of Nicole and Mark's little puppy love adventure, a lot of things were happening. Mark's friend group, consisting of Mark, Riddell, and Kathy, had some trouble brewing. Riddell was making a breakthrough in his movie production dreams. Mark was off with Nicole, pouring his heart and soul into the piano. This leaves us with Kathy, who felt that she was getting left behind. Adding her horrible home situation into the mix, Kathy wasn't in the best place mentally. Louise, the class president of Mark's class, was also looking into the strange phenomenon behind the frequent and strange deja vu that Mark and a few other people were experiencing. One of her theories was that this was a result of quantum anomalies crashing into each other, causing the strange deja vu, as well as causing people to go missing. The main story and all the subplots come together in the climactic prom night. Mark gets his dance with Nicole, Kath gets to spend prom happy with her friends and new crush, and Kath suddenly goes missing. Mark, scared of what Louise said about people disappearing, runs off to find Kath. He finally finds her, but then... The game fast forwards us years later. Mark, now married to Nicole, is planning to move out of town and we see him packing his belongings. One of them is the CD that Kath gave him with a recording of Kath opening up to him about everything. Underneath that CD is the game that they last played together. Mark plays this one last time and then all of a sudden, a butterfly lands on his hand and things go black. And then suddenly, we're back to the day of Mark's presentation with Louise. Everything feels the same as when we started, but there are minor differences that ultimately culminate into a big change in the plot. This time around, Mark, Riddell, and Kath are more tight-knit as a friend group. Mark opens up to his friends about his mother going missing earlier into the story. Mark, Nicole, and Louise form a trio investigating the anomalies surrounding the ruling. But like last time, everything comes together during prom night. Kath goes missing again, and Mark goes looking for her. With Louise and Nicole being in the know about the disappearances, they go after Kath too. This time around, however, we end with Kath disappearing and Louise getting into a fatal accident as a result of a sudden earthquake. With both Louise and Kath gone, Mark obsesses over the anomalies, ignoring everything in his life, including Nicole. A butterfly lands on his hand yet again and we start over. This time, Mark is more aware of what's going on. That night, Mark finds Nicole on social media and tries to message her, but is startled to find that she messages him first. Suddenly, the cycle repeats. He wakes up on presentation day again, but this time Nicole sends him a message, confirming that she's experiencing the same thing that he's experiencing. They meet up earlier in the story than they would before, and are determined to get to the bottom of this. The more the cycle repeats, the stronger the effects of the ruling and the more broken the city becomes. In an effort to fix this whole mess, Mark and Nicole restart the cycle so many times that it breaks reality. The two are transported into a void where they are shown each other's memories leading up to the loss of Mark's mom and Jake. In the end, it was revealed that it was the mom and Jake's desire for Mark and Nicole to be happy that brought about the anomalies, the hundreds of lifetimes that Mark and Nicole lived. They were the butterflies that would appear whenever the timeline reset earlier in the story. But it was through this revelation that Mark and Nicole were finally able to let go of their past and move on to their own happy endings? Question mark? Anyway, that's the summary. That took a while, but now we can get on with the discussion. The recurring timelines element is probably the most attention-catching part of the story. While it took a while to get to the point where it was introduced to the player, I feel like I speak for most people when I say we probably never anticipated that would happen. By the time players reached the second loop, we were probably frothing in the mouth, wanting to know exactly what the heck was going on. The choice to go with a recurring timeline most likely goes deeper than just a cool way to tell a story. It hammers in one of the biggest themes of the game: grief. We normally view grief in a very linear pattern. We go about our normal lives, experience loss, experience grief, try to recover from said grief, and try to go back to some kind of baseline normality. One of the most popular ways people describe grief is the 5 stages of grief. One goes through denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, which is again another linear way of looking at grief. Also, in the first place, it wasn't supposed to describe grief, but more of a description of how people face their own impending death, but I digress. However, we're slowly coming to accept that grief isn't as simple and as linear as we think. While there are many ways to experience grief, as it is a highly personal journey, how the devs presented Mark and Nicole's journey of grief may look familiar to those who have already experienced it or may be experiencing it currently. The recurring timeline element of that story is an amazing way to represent being caught in that cycle of grief. While the recurring timeline is an artistic and extreme metaphorical representation of grief, there are some very real ways that this can relate to how people experience time and the world around them when grieving. We'll be drawing parallels between the fictional Until Then and the real experiences of grieving parents detailed in the academic paper Time in Grief: How Do Bereaved Parents Mentalize It? In this paper, Janusz et al. Describes how parents mentalize grief and their experience of time. Mentalization is the ability to understand the mental state of oneself or others, or thinking about thinking, as a psychologist David Wallen would call it. We're not going to bore you with a really long scientific paper, so let's do it like I would usually do with my college research papers and skip directly to the results portion. The researchers identified 3 main themes related to the parents' experiences of grieving for their lost child. These themes were mentally back, now and in another world, and managing the discontinuity of time and the world. Mentally back is all about going to the past, sometimes involuntarily, like suddenly remembering their passing, or looking back and thinking, I could have done more, or seeing something that reminded them of their child, like their clothes or toys. This may be triggered through feelings of regret, guilt, or longing for the lost loved one. The researchers proposed that this often painful act of going back to the past served as some kind of emotional regulation. This happens through processing the events or even just feeling a fleeting connection with the loved one who has passed. If this feels familiar, then yeah, we've seen pretty much all of it through Mark. There are many scenes of Mark recounting his mom leaving. We also see the emails that Mark would send his mom, blaming himself, saying that he'd do anything to get her back. Mark would often fondly look back at his mom, playing Nicole's piece on the piano, even going as far as to learning the piano himself, just to feel even just a little bit closer to his mom in some way. Mark's whole piano story arc was just all a big episode of what the researchers called mentally back, him processing the events and trying to feel a fleeting connection with his mom. In the theme of Now and in Another World, the researchers describe how the past haunts the parents, preventing them from being truly present in the now. It describes how the previous mentally back theme would pull them away from the world they live in, constantly being pulled back into the time when their loved one was still present. Some parents reported not remembering much in the months following their child's death. Some also reported creating mental barriers, disconnecting themselves from reality just so they could function to some degree day to day. Sometimes the disconnect was so intense that they didn't allow themselves to mourn their loss just because it would be too much, leaving them paralyzed. Again, we see this in Mark and also Nicole. Mark put up huge barriers in order to just barely function. Mark put up the facade that his mom was still alive somewhere out there. He also distanced himself from doing well in school. He was only putting in the bare minimum effort, because what even was the point if his mom couldn't be there to be proud of him? He could only put effort into playing the piano with Nicole, because it was the only time he felt close to his mom, constantly being in that mentally back state. Nicole also withdrew, but hers came in the form of withdrawing from the one thing that reminded her of the day her best friend disappeared: the piano. The last theme that the researchers observed was managing the discontinuity of time and the world. This can be summarized as the grieving party being unable to reconcile with the unreasonableness or meaninglessness of the death itself. As a result of this, they feel out of place in ordinary life. The loss was so great that the world felt so different and unwelcoming now that the person is no more. A parent describes their experience as such: "I don't know how to say it, that this tragedy of mine, Rita's death, that it was unimportant in the daily life of the whole world, that children die, children are born." This theme also encompasses the feeling of being stuck in the past and the shattering of how you used to perceive the world before the loss. Within this theme, the researchers also observed how the parents managed their feelings of discontinuity of the world. Ironically, it's the realization that the discontinuity exists that triggers a change in their mindset to try to live more in the present. The account from the parent is so close to what Mark said when he remembered how his mom had disappeared. They called the ruling the end of the world, but the worst part is, it wasn't. The world kept moving around me and I couldn't stop it. While Nicole doesn't verbally state it, she also most likely thought this way, because while she was a direct victim of the ruling herself, she never stopped looking for Jake. Even with her new life with Mark unfolding in front of her, she still took Mark to her hometown to visit Jake's house, to look for any semblance of Jake's presence or any explanation of what happened to him. Okay, until then's depiction of grief is very similar to accounts of real-life grief, but we're here to talk about the recurring timeline. What does this have to do with the recurring timeline? I hear you say? Everything. It has everything to do with the recurring timeline. Across all these themes, one aspect is constantly present: the experience of either being stuck in the past or wanting to go back to the past. At the start of the paper, the researchers describe the parents' experience as such. Parents experience time and grief through oscillation between the past with the deceased child and a restricted form of existence in the present reality. Until then takes that experience and dials it up to 11. Instead of being mentally stuck in the past, Until Then chose to portray our protagonists as literally oscillating between past and present, in the form of reliving their lives over and over. Toward the end of the game, Jake says that they probably lived over 100 lifetimes, but in every one of them, she's still looking for me. Mark is the same. On both the first and second times Mark chases after Kath, he remembers his mom and hears his mom's voice. His friend is in mortal danger and he can't stay focused in the present. It also gets progressively worse toward the end of the game. Mark's disregard for the present becomes increasingly obvious as he hyper-focuses on fixing things and tries to get everything to go back to how it used to be, ignoring not just Kath, but everything else in the process, until it all collapses. Going back to the study, the researchers observed that it was through realizing, I'm still here, despite all that's changed, despite all I've lost, I'm still here and the world moves on, that triggered a change in their mentality. They realized that they need to start living in the present again. I'd like to interpret that that's what the collapse represents. Throughout the game, Nicole and Mark become increasingly aware of their situation, increasingly aware that they're living their lives over and over, much like how the bereaved parents couldn't remember much about what went on shortly after they lost their child. They couldn't remember anything about their lives. They were so caught up in this overwhelming grief that everything was a blurry mess. But now that they see what they're stuck in, everything starts falling apart, but at the same time, everything becomes clearer. They just wanted to fix things, but realized that there's no fixing something that's already lost. After getting some closure from meeting Mark's mom and Jake in the white space, they resolved to not look back and live in the present. After this, we go back to Mark, chasing after Kath. He finds her and tells her that he wants to understand what she's going through, expressing a desire to be there and help her through her struggles. With his grief now taking a backseat in his life, he's able to look at his present and be present for those who are still there. Until Then gives us an artful, masterful presentation of grief. To the bereaved, grief feels like being stuck in time. Stuck in a never-ending loop of reliving the past and wanting to go back to the past. Its tight grip may feel like it can hold on for a lifetime, maybe even 100 lifetimes. It may feel like the end of the world, but you're still here, and the world hasn't ended yet. Thank you for listening to our really long analysis and love letter to the amazing story of Until Then. We hope that this gave you just a little bit more to appreciate about the game. If you're into these kinds of story analysis videos, may I suggest this video of us breaking down the psychology of Senua's psychosis, or this one of Kiryu learning to accept that it's okay to need help. You can find those videos in the corner over there, somewhere. Anyway, like if you like, share this with other people who love Until Then too, maybe. Subscribe for more video game related content. This has been Game8, signing off.